The story kicks off with a breathtaking view of a vast sky, where the sun blazes fiercely over an alien world. For a fleeting moment, the bright blue sky seems utterly peaceful, but that peace vanishes instantly when a colossal, 9-headed dragon, named Hydragon, lets out a terrifying roar, shaking the very ground beneath them and freezing the slave soldiers in sheer terror. Despite their overwhelming fear, they have no choice but to raise their spears and clash them together, hoping the rattling noise will scare the beast away. The battlefield churns with dust, shouts, and blood. Yet through all the chaos, one warrior moves with steady, sharp precision. He cuts down an enemy with a single, clean strike, displaying zero hesitation, as enemies recoil from him, calling him a monster too terrified to stand close. But even he is barely holding on. His hands tremble, his breathing is ragged, and his body feels on the verge of collapsing. The enemy spots his weakness and rushes toward him with loud screams, covered in blood and eager to strike. He lifts his head, but his vision is fading fast, and his strength has completely vanished. His heart feels like it's about to burst, and his breath rasps like a knife, scraping his throat as he exhales and finally collapses, falling helplessly toward the battlefield below. He can't tell if what's dripping from him is blood or sweat, and all his senses scream one thing. This isn't some graphic effect, this is brutal reality. But as he plummets, they announce that powerful, hidden traits like the heart of the iron-blooded monarch, along with Weapon Master, Masterful Hands, and many others, have just awakened within him, suddenly infused with new strength. He crashes into the enemy lines with surprising force and unleashes one last desperate attack. Then, everything fades away as he is completely overpowered. The scene then shifts to a completely opposite landscape. A small, cluttered modern room. A lone man sits in the dark, illuminated only by his computer screen, which displays a huge game over. Meet our protagonist, Park. He leans back in his chair, with a mix of frustration and crushing disappointment. His name was meant to symbolize a wise life. Yet he spends every day confined to this cramped room, surrounded by empty cups, trash, and the blue glow of his monitor. He played games throughout the weekdays, not even stopping on weekends while everyone else worked hard. And when he quit his job a few months ago, he holed himself up alone in his room and lived like a gaming addict. But he kept doing it day after day. For 5 whole years, he's been fixated on a single game, ignoring almost everything else around him. He hardly ever leaves his room, barely keeping track of real life anymore. The game he's obsessed with is Pangea, which gained brief popularity 5 years ago, with the promise that if someone cleared the game, the developers would grant them one wish. But they promoted this phrase, which was, frankly, a ridiculous line, and players with too much time on their hands got curious and gave a shot, but ultimately failed. Now, 5 years have passed, and no one has cleared it, and the player count has dropped significantly. And now, if Park isn't logged in, the game displays online players, 0. The game was infamous for its brutal difficulty, right from its launch. And Park remembers the old forum posts, full of anger and frustrated players quitting after facing bosses that were nearly impossible to defeat, along with companions who would betray players without warning. And if that wasn't enough, the game also featured named NPCs that could instantly destroy characters. In this game, death permanently deletes a character. Hours, days, weeks, or even years of progress vanish in seconds. His overflowing. The ashtray reminds him just how long the game community has been gone from his life. He grimly recalls his most recent defeat. Another powerful character permanently erased. 5 years of non-stop effort poured into that character, along with 8 of the 15 known unique items, now all gone, leaving him utterly drained and hollow. But then, a sudden notification flashes on his screen, instantly catching his attention. His latest death has surprisingly earned him a whopping 1.6 million soul points. That's far more than he's ever received before. Even deleting hundreds of other characters never came Close to this amount, barely 80,000 points in total. The game utilized a unique soul point system, where players earned soul points, corresponding to their deceased character's value. These points allowed players to buy talents and begin their next life significantly stronger. With 1.6 million points, he could boost almost everything. Right from the very beginning, he remembers a previous warrior, one he had meticulously crafted, with an investment of 10,000 soul points into formidable sword abilities, only to die with the title Master of Swordsmanship. Yet, even that character's soul value was minuscule compared to this, since any talent had an investment limit of 10,000 soul points. Now, Park can practically invest in everything. Normally, he would always pick safe and predictable magic talents. This time, however, he feels utterly different. Since he no longer expects to ever beat the game, he decides to finally take a wild chance. He deliberately presses the random button, aiming to create one final character purely for fun. He confirms the choice, barely thinking deeply about it. As the screen loads, his mind drifts to a painful memory. He remembers sitting alone in a coffee shop, while the woman he deeply loved calmly, coldly ended their relationship. She explained, point by painful point, how he lacked ambition, no direction, and no real plan for his life. Her words hurt him more than any in-game death, and he found himself utterly unable to defend himself. He simply had nothing to say. Instead, she mercilessly compared him to others their age, who already held down stable, promising jobs, and were building truly stable lives. And every comparison just made him feel smaller. Her disappointment was palpable in her voice, and etched on her face as if he was the sole one who'd failed to keep pace with the world. Shame burned within him, pushing his eyes to the floor, while everything around him felt like it was crumbling. In that hushed cafe, with a tired sigh, she ended their 5 years together and walked away with her final goodbye. But her goodbye sounded utterly hollow compared to the heavy darkness settling inside him. He stayed there alone in the cold, dull light of the cafe, feeling utterly separated from reality itself. That moment severed his last connection to the real world, leaving him drifting, unsure of what he even had left. So, 3 months ago, driven by bitterness and hopelessness, he quit his dead-end job and plunged fully into the digital world, which felt safer than anything outside. Now, staring at his screen, he vows to stop being the pathetic version of his former self. Using his massive amount of soul points, he begins upgrading his character with rapid speed. The screen flashes brightly in his glasses as the system informed him that a hidden piece has been activated. Instantly shocking Park, he wondered what it was. It congratulates Park for meeting the requirements for something called a singularity. Before he can react, the boundary between the game and his room shatters. The monitor pulls him forward as the digital world becomes real, dragging him into a burst of blinding crimson light. A monstrous voice roars somewhere in the void, filled with destructive power and divine fury. A sharp, crushing pain hits his head, forcing him to his knees. As his mind feels like it's being rewritten, the voice declared that all the words he created would burn to ashes because he was a wicked god. His body collapses to the floor, knocked unconscious by the overwhelming force. In the dark room, his monitor flickers with a strange pulse. A cryptic prophecy unfolds, speaking of a being standing at the very nexus of creation and destruction. The prophecy's final message wishes him happiness within the world of Pangea. He jolts awake to a brutal smack to the ribs, forcing him violently back to consciousness. In a dusty, utterly unfamiliar place, a brutal overseer looms over him, screaming threats and demanding he rise or face the Hydragon's wrath. The mere mention of the Hydragon freezes him solid. He knows the name all too well from the game. A whip cracks sharply beside him, but his eyes are locked onto the horizon. There, in the distance, he spots the massive, multicolored monsters he defeated thousands of times, always through a screen. Seeing them in real life shakes him to his very core. Another slave shoves him forward into line, terrified of punishment from their captors. But he barely registers it, his mind racing, trying to grasp how he went from his room to this scorching desert. A low growl rumbles from his throat as his panic slowly morphs into focused analysis. Everything around him precisely matches Pangea's world. He knows this place far too well. As if reacting to his dawning realization, he mentally called out the status window, and a holographic status window materializes in the air. His eyes widen in disbelief as he reads it. It confirms the utterly impossible. All his starting stats are astonishingly maxed at 12, and the list of hidden traits is absurdly long. He stands frozen among the other slaves. Finally, accepting he has physically entered the game world, the interface floats steadily before him, proving this is no mere hallucination. He scrutinizes the numbers again, starting with stats of 12. Should be completely impossible, because starting stats should range from 1 to 10, depending on invested soul points. But what was even more shocking was the ridiculously long list of 13 legendary traits, something that simply should never exist. On a level 1 character, before he can process everything, the ground begins shaking violently. The veteran slaves around him freeze, fear gripping their faces. A thick dust cloud billows in the distance, signaling something massive is approaching. Screams erupt as the Desert Queen's army charges forward. At the forefront, riding colossal hydras, is the Snake Princess, her presence radiating an aura of dangerous power as she commands her monstrous beasts. He recognizes her instantly, a major NPC he's read about countless times in the game's lore. A sharp chime echoes above the battlefield as a new window appears, announcing the start of a main quest. The message is simple, yet terrifying. Survive or die, in both the game and the real world. This penalty sends a chilling surge of fear through him, cold and instinctive. The sky fills with a wave of black arrows that rain down upon the unprotected slaves. Men scream and collapse as arrows strike, while everyone else panics wildly. But Park remains incredibly still, overwhelmed by the sheer reality of the situation. Just then, a calm blue energy surrounds him. The activation of the heart of the iron-blooded monarch. This is a linked trait that only appears when every physical talent is maxed out. Park knows this prevents exhaustion, reduces his chances of being caught off guard, and allows him to grasp the situation rapidly. His eyes lock onto a sword lying in the sand. He knows standing still will get him killed. He moves swiftly, dodging a falling body and snatching the weapon. The blade's weight feels strangely natural in his hand. As he rises, the sword vibrates faintly, responding to the surging power inside him. An overseer swings at him in a panic, but he blocks the strike without hesitation. His counterattack is fast and clean, cutting down the man in a single, fluid motion. Blood splatters the sand, but he doesn't flinch. His body moves with chilling precision. As the system activates, once again, telling the boy that his hidden trait, weapon, master, has been activated. And now, the boy knew exactly what he had to do. As the battlefield shifted violently around him, Park then spotted a group of slavers charging straight for him. They'd spotted a lone survivor amidst the chaos. They hurled insults, closing in fast, their intent to kill brutally clear. But before their heavy, lethal blows could land, Park had already vanished. Their weapons sliced through nothing but empty air, missing him by mere milliseconds. His body moved on pure instinct, weaving expertly past a spear, whose razor-sharp tip nearly grazed his cheek. The moment his fingers closed around the weapon's shaft, a strange familiarity pulsed through him, deep within his muscles, even though it was the very first time he'd ever held such a weapon in his real life. Fueled by his hidden traits, he countered instantly, driving the stolen spear straight through the slaver with the clean, deadly precision of a veteran fighter. His movements became blindingly fast and sharper than he could consciously follow, causing panic to erupt among the surrounding enemies. As their comrades fell, Park moved like a phantom across the sand, his body twisting and striking with smooth, deadly efficiency that no novice should possess. Even through the intense rush of adrenaline, he found himself staring in utter disbelief. These were actions he'd only ever performed through a keyboard. Yet now, his body moved as though it had trained for years. Another attack snapped him back into focus. He parried a lethal strike that surely would have taken off his head. And as he did, a strange haze lifted from his senses. His observation trait activated, revealing faint lines of mana flowing inside his opponent's body. Simultaneously, a system message echoed in his mind, telling him he could now predict attack trajectories before they even began. With this new clarity, he slipped through the melee with newfound ease. An enemy blade sliced harmlessly through the space he'd occupied just a moment earlier, and Park retaliated with a devastating counter that shattered the slaver's guard instantly and ended their duel in a flash. Without missing a beat, he snatched a battle axe right out of the air. His stance shifted instinctively, guided by his innate weapon mastery, allowing him to swing the new weapon with perfect balance. His downward strike crushed the defense of yet another attacker, sending the slavers skidding across the hot sand. One by one, the enemies recoiled in terror as their squad crumbled. They had charged a mere slave, only to realize too late that they were facing something far more deadly. But as the last immediate threat fell silent, the immense exertion hit Park like a wall. His breath came in heavy, ragged gasps, sweat pouring down his face as the adrenaline began to fade. His body had been pushed far past its very limits, and the overwhelming power of his traits clashed fiercely with his simple human stamina. The remaining slavers hesitated, unsettled by the sight of a single man, holding their entire squad at bay. A blue window shimmered before Park's eyes, informing him that his weapon proficiency was rising at an unnatural, staggering rate. It was already at level 6, something most other players needed weeks to achieve. But when he looked at his own trembling hand, he understood the harsh truth. Legendary skills meant nothing if his physical strength completely burned out. Looking across the ravaged battlefield and seeing hundreds of enemies still out there, despair began to creep in. Survival felt utterly impossible. Far away, in a throne room bathed in a sinister red light, the Desert Queen lounged upon her opulent seat, while the air around her remained tense and eerily silent. She studied the kneeling figure before her. Isabella, the notorious Snake Princess, her single red eye glowing with cold disappointment. She spoke sharply, revealing her true underlying concern. If any witnesses survived the failed expedition, her city would be blamed. To prevent that outcome, she ordered Isabella to return to the Keltsman Desert and wipe out every remaining straggler. As Isabella rose to leave, the queen offered one final, tempting hook, a promise to lift the curse binding her. If she succeeded, shame and hope ignited within Isabella. Thoughts flickered across Isabella's face as the queen's grave warning echoed in her mind. Failure, she knew, meant a fate worse than death. Under the vast, open sky, Isabella stood tall atop her colossal hydra, the wind whipping through her dark hair. As she surveyed the devastation below, her keen eyes scanned the horrific carnage until they landed on a lone figure still standing firm. From Park's perspective, she appeared as a dark silhouette framed by blinding sunlight, poised atop a living mountain of scaled muscle. Isabella narrowed her eyes, both annoyed and surprisingly intrigued that a mere slave had survived the initial slaughter. Park leaned heavily on his sword, barely able to keep himself upright as the last of his adrenaline drained away. His vision blurred and his breath trembled, but just as his legs threatened to give out, a familiar chime rang clearly in the air, and a system message flashed into existence. His health and mana had been fully restored, thanks to his level increasing to level 2. Fresh energy surged through his body, clearing his fatigue in an instant. He stood tall again, ready to fight if necessary. The slavers nearby, unaware of his sudden recovery, charged toward him to finish the job. Their attack never landed, A massive shadow swept over them, before the Hydra's colossal tail slammed into the ground, crushing them in a single, devastating impact. Park looked up in a mix of awe and dread. The true boss of the area had finally arrived. Isabella stepped forward on her rocky perch, her sheer presence alone freezing the air around her. Park's great sage trait attempted to analyze her, but the system only returned errors. He caught a chilling glimpse of her level 8. His heart sank. In Pangea, anything above level 7 was considered a natural disaster, a force usually dealt with by an entire raid team, not a lone beginner. Standing before her wasn't a battle. It was suicide. A glitching status window revealed one more crucial detail. Isabella was suffering from a curse tied to the Desert Queen. Park's eyes widened. This was lore he knew incredibly well, and the only advantage he could possibly cling to as Isabella gazed down with chilling indifference, acknowledging his skill, yet deeming it utterly meaningless. Her killing intent erupted. A spectral snake coiled menacingly behind her as she vanished in an instant. In a blink, she reappeared right before him, blade raised, ready to end his life. The strike came so fast it was a blur, but in that impossibly narrow moment, just a fleeting fraction of a second, Park didn't raise his sword to defend. He smirked, and instead of defending himself, he blocked her killing blow with mere words, shouting a shocking question. Did she want to be free from the Queen's curse? It was so shocking, Isabella froze, her blade inches from his very throat. The sheer shockwave of Isabella's halted strike blew Park's hair back, the cold edge of her blade resting precariously against his throat. She stood frozen, eyes wide with utter disbelief, her icy, murderous composure shattered by the devastating piece of secret lore he had just brazenly revealed. A heavy, pregnant silence settled between them as she stared intently into his eyes. Her fierce, killing intent slowly faded into a trembling, fragile curiosity. Park kept his voice remarkably steady as he recited the hidden lore tied directly to her character, confidently claiming to be a star-bearer, one who could read the destiny of the stars. With absolute, unwavering certainty, he offered her the one thing she desired, more than anything else in the world. A way to finally break the Queen's curse. The very moment he mentioned lifting the curse, Isabella's pupils widened instantly, hope flickering deep inside her. Despite the stubborn suspicion locked in her gaze, bit by bit, the raw tension drained from her posture. She slowly lowered her weapon, proving his audacious gamble had paid off. Inside, Park quietly acknowledged the truth. The Star-Bearer was indeed a rare NPC class, required to surpass the game's ultimate level cap. And according to the lore he distinctly remembered, Isabella could only ever escape the Queen's curse with the sacred blessing of Star-Bearer. He watched her intently, every move a tell. He caught the subtle tremor in her shoulders, a telltale sign, as she desperately fought to conceal her burning desire for freedom. In that instant, he knew he had already secured his victory. Her raw desperation left her utterly vulnerable to his carefully chosen words. Watching her hesitation sparked a peculiar sensation within him, a mix of burgeoning pride and gnawing guilt. After all, he was the one who had meticulously designed her character. Isabella was always destined to be a formidable protagonist, a legendary figure meant to journey across the entire world, and ultimately witness the game's grand finale. But because his personal playthrough began in a different region, she was cruelly left behind, stranded in the scorching desert by a cruel narrative thread he had, ironically, penned himself. Shattering the heavy silence, Isabella finally inquired about his name. Her voice was noticeably softer now, less like a predator assessing its prey, and more like someone speaking to a potential savior. Park smoothly slipped into the persona he had so carefully crafted, introducing himself as the enigmatic Randolph. It was a name perfectly suited for his invented temporary role. She turned away, her crimson cape dramatically sweeping through the air, announcing that his execution was officially postponed. His life was, for now, miraculously spared. But she shot a sharp glance back over her shoulder to sternly warn him that deceit would earn him a fate far more gruesome and agonizing the mere death, with a chilling promise to tear him utterly apart if he dared to fail in fulfilling his crucial promise. Then, with a single decisive command, she ordered her troops to treat him as an honored guest, instantly elevating his status from a mere slave to a true VIP. A dazzling blue system window promptly flashed before his eyes, confirming the triumphant completion of Main Quest 1, Survival. This was swiftly followed by a dazzling cascade of notifications and rewards from the ever-watchful constellations of Fortune and Battle. The moment the intense adrenaline finally abandoned him, his legs utterly gave out, and he collapsed to the dusty ground, completely overwhelmed by the sheer, mind-boggling absurdity of what he had just endured. Another urgent notification then informed him that his extraordinary, record-breaking score would be etched forever into the Global Hall of Fame. Time swiftly passed, and the scene dramatically shifted to the cool, moonlit towers of Isabella's magnificent palace. Now, he was luxuriating in an opulent bath, miles removed from the gritty blood and dust of the battlefield. Park meticulously examined the legendary loot he had received. Among these treasures lay the fabled Sword of Makela, the soul of a high dragon, an ultra-rare item, one that had only surfaced once in the game's entire history, and a broken golden scale, boasting a cryptic ability to synchronize reality. And Pangea itself. His quiet moment, however, was abruptly shattered as the bathhouse door swung wide open, and three lightly dressed maids stepped inside, smiling brightly as they confidently approached him. Their task? To bathe him. A standard service for honored guests, but a truly terrifying situation for Park. Startled and panicking internally, he stiffly requested they only wash his feet, desperately trying to maintain the aloof persona of a starbearer. As they scrubbed, the clear, physical sensation of their touch made him acutely aware of just how real this world had become. He then noticed the maids exchanging subtle, knowing looks. His paranoia spiked. They had to be Isabella's spies, testing him for any inconsistency. Park forced himself to stay absolutely calm, eyes closed, trying to act like someone entirely untouched by earthly desires. Then, one maid suddenly gasped. Park's heart lurched, but she was staring at a glowing blue system window that had materialized right between them. He opened his eyes to see the Hall of Fame ranking, along with a disturbing countdown titled Pangea Breakdown. As he scanned the list of names, shock hit him hard. He recognized the players ranked just below him. His old guildmates, Grazia and Mint Chocolate, had been summoned here as well. The system then displayed another crucial message. Because he ranked in the survival quest, the logout feature was now unlocked. His thoughts derailed when a maid questioned him about being a starbearer, almost catching him completely off guard. Park snapped his head in her direction, nearly breaking character from sheer surprise. Determination instantly replaced his panic as he realized the staggering implications. If he could log out, he could escape this world. But a warning suddenly popped up, stating that his character would remain vulnerable in-game while he was gone, and if the character died. So, was there even a shot? A wave of relief washed over him. There was still a chance. He shot upright, sending water splashing everywhere, and commanded the maids to leave immediately, claiming he needed to commune with the stars. Confused and visibly skeptical, they hesitated, but Isabella's imposing authority compelled them into reluctant obedience. The door clicked shut, and Park sagged back into the bath, letting out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. His flimsy excuse had actually worked. His gaze fixed on the ripples in the water. He finally admitted just how terrified he truly was of being trapped in this world forever. With a quiet, desperate vow to escape this nightmare, he reached out and pressed log out. As his consciousness began to fade, one last, ominous message appeared on screen. If your character dies while you are gone, you die in reality. The scene snapped abruptly back to the real world. The very moment Park regained consciousness, he jolted upright in his gaming chair, drenched in a cold sweat, gasping as if jolted awake from a nightmare. But outside his window, loud crashes and terrified screams echoed through the streets. Confused and trembling, his heart pounding, he He cautiously walked over to see what was happening, but the sight that met his eyes froze him in absolute horror. Monsters from Pangea were roaming the real world, tearing through the streets, and emerging from fires that raged across the city. A chilling shriek from one of the creatures pierced the night. Park stumbled backward in utter shock, collapsing onto his bed. As he hit the mattress, something slipped out of his pocket, the broken golden scale, and struck the floor with a sharp, metallic chime. His breath caught in his throat as he picked up the golden fragment, the one piece of proof he desperately wished he could deny. The moment he felt its weight in his hand, the horrifying reality he had been resisting finally broke through. He quickly shoved it back into his pocket, his mind racing at the terrifying implication that the digital world wasn't just leaking into the physical one, it was actively merging with it. He turned to his computer, hoping for even a sliver of normalcy. But the game's homepage was gone, replaced by an error message about server inquiries. Before he could even process it, a blood-curdling scream from outside ripped through the air, freezing him in place. He ran to the window, and what he saw turned his stomach. A giant insectoid monster was emerging from flames, licking its legs as it brutally slashed through innocent humans, its eyes glowing with unnatural hunger. Down on the street, grotesque creatures ripped through crowds of civilians. Police fired desperately, but their bullets bounced off the armored hide of a towering, mantis-like beast. Meanwhile, frantic calls for reinforcements echoed due to the dire emergency situation, as multiple unidentified monsters had appeared. Even Park's phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating violently with continuous emergency alerts. Each one warned of unidentified attacks across the entire region. Park stared out the window, utterly unable to comprehend why. Monsters from Pangea were tearing apart the real world. Then, a massive mantis turned its monstrous head toward him. Their eyes met through the glass. Its mandibles twitched as if choosing him. Next, his legs gave out, and he collapsed to the floor, his glasses slipping askew on his face. As if on cue, the golden shattered piece fell down. Park wondered if the boundary between reality and the game was truly broken. But suddenly, a system notification popped up, telling the boy that, as the game's destruction progresses, the boundary between reality and the game weakens. If destruction progress exceeds 10%, the first gate will take place. And the progress was already at 7.6% and rising fast. Panic clawed at his chest. He had no weapon, no armor, no way to defend himself in the real world. His gaze locked onto the golden fragment. His only hope lay there on the floor. Scrambling forward, the boy reached for it. He clung to the idea that, if monsters from the game were now roaming freely in reality, then maybe items from the game could also be used in reality. Thinking about that, Park ran towards a stable and spotted a pouch. It was right there, and as he opened it, he saw it was his inventory. Inside were Marcella's sword and the soul of the Hydra dragon. He clutched the glowing red gem, but nothing happened. There was no simple double-click mechanic here. Frustration surged as he stared at the interface, realizing he didn't know how to manually activate any of the items. But the system window clarified it. The fragment of the broken golden scale allows synchronization between reality and the game. It could be toggled on and off at whim, with a remaining time of 24 hours. As Park thought about activating it, a small fairy appeared behind him. And then, the synchronization began. The countdown was on, 24 hours, before the synchronization wore off. He was now Randolph. At the same time, the city streets had become an inferno of smoke, fire, and blood. Corpses lay scattered across the cracked pavement. A mother sprinted through the chaos, clutching her young daughter tight. As explosions shook the ground, the child cried helplessly for her father. The mother, already short of breath, promised he'd be there soon as she pulled her along. But just then, something happened above them. A chunk of concrete broke off a collapsing building. It plummeted down, smashing into the street below. The impact sent the little girl tumbling away, while her mother was crushed under the rubble. Blood trickled down the woman's head as she screamed for her daughter to run. A young woman in business clothes rushed forward, trembling as she grabbed the crying child. The mother was already losing her strength. She pleaded with the stranger to take her daughter and save her. Her eyes welled up with tears. The office worker frantically pulled the girl away from the crumbling ruins, just as a towering mantis creature opened its gaping maw to devour them. The child was shielded by the stranger's arms as the monstrous creature dropped toward the helpless woman, as she braced herself, wondering if this was their end. But before it could reach her, a sharp blade ripped through the air as a flash of blue light illuminated the swirling dust. A massive sword then tore through the monster in a single devastating strike, splitting it cleanly in two. Oozing green blood splattered across the ground as a figure landed with a heavy impact among the rubble. The young woman froze, clutching the girl tightly as she realized, in a shock, that they were alive, and she stared, bewildered, at the newcomer, a man dressed in peculiar clothes. Clothes unlike anything from today's standards, yet wielding a blade straight out of fantasy realm. His expression was calm, focused, and impossibly composed amid the chaos. But before she could even speak, the air behind him shimmered, churning from within the smoke. A huge, serpentine head then lunged forward, its single red eye burning with predatory hunger. The woman screamed a warning, but he was already moving, instincts sharpened by some unseen synchronization, reacting to the threat even before it fully emerged, before the monster could fully breach the smoke. With a fluid motion, Park slashed upward, intercepting the monster's attack. With a powerful burst of red energy, the creature staggered backward, green blood splattering across the cracked pavement, as the woman, still holding the child, watched the impossible scene unfold before her eyes. But the woman was about to get another shock, because now, what she saw was ripped straight from a comic book. Because behind our hero was a dragon with 9 heads, its eyes glowing with a terrifying crimson light. And without wasting a single moment, Park leapt onto one of the high dragon's 9 heads and turned toward the woman, telling her to stay absolutely still. But the lady, on the other hand, wondered if she was dreaming. What she was seeing simply couldn't be real. But just then, the child sprang from the lady's grasp, immediately dashing toward her mother, anxiously asking if she was all right. But now, she witnessed our boy single-handedly defeating every wild creature that had been relentlessly attacking the city, all with the help of the majestic 9-headed dragon. She wondered, who was he? What was he doing? In a place like this? We soon learned that monsters didn't just appear in one country. They erupted simultaneously across the entire world, and as soon as they materialized, they immediately began slaughtering people and ruthlessly dismantling human civilization. However, they weren't the only ones to emerge. Yet, humanity wasn't entirely defenseless. Some individuals had awakened, gaining incredible superhuman strength. Just like the legendary players from Pangea, a gleaming suit of armor flashed on a survivor screen, symbolizing the return of the game's mechanics to reality itself. These awakened individuals could cut down monsters who were immune to bullets, as if they were utterly nothing. In another part of the world, a charismatic player stood triumphantly atop a tank, sword raised high, as he rallied terrified civilians with fervent shouts of unity. His inspiring speech, broadcast live through countless smartphones, painted him as humanity's true hero in its darkest hour. The broadcast ended with this: Park knew then that the world was rapidly changing. But as the scene shifts, we see someone who was watching this very broadcast from a luxury apartment. This dark-haired man scoffed at the entire display as he derisively called the player an idiot for wasting his precious fragments of the broken golden scale. We see that in his hand, he held a gleaming golden fragment, one the system identified as belonging to Massacre, a notorious top-tier ranker. And it had now been confirmed that reality and the game were beginning to merge. The entire world might merge into one over time. And in this coming age of chaos, everyone would inevitably become a competitor. Only those who gather more fragments and immense power will rise as the true protagonists of this era. Why? Because the rankings stagnant for 2 years, have finally been updated. The top score? An absurd 220 points. And we see Massacre holding strong at 5th place. But in 1st place, it's Randolph. Massacre wonders, could this be Phantom? Phantom is also famously known as Ghost, since no one knows his true name. Everyone refers to him by these two monikers. Phantom was the first to organize an NPC expedition dubbed the Demon Realm Expedition. He was the only one to ever reach the very brink of the game's final clear. Yet, even after multiple attempts, it always ended in complete failure. Still, Phantom was undeniably the undisputed #1 player in the entire game, and since the strongest character he possessed would be summoned upon that meant Randolph must be. The game ended the moment the expedition failed, even when appearance and equipment were reset. But talents from the previous character carried over. This made Massacre realize he understood exactly how Randolph achieved such a high score. The scene shifts. We find Randolph back in the game, leaning back in warm bath water, thoughtfully rubbing his chin. As he connected the threads of his past experiences, it became clear the monsters appearing in reality were mirroring the arrival of players in the game world. As he closed his eyes, he recalled the Demon Realm Expedition, his almost successful run, plagued by unexpected sabotage. He remembered a loyal knight kneeling in defeat, surrounded by falling swords. A heartbreaking symbol of his past failure. But now he understood the hired NPC mercenaries, who had suddenly acted irrationally, weren't glitches. They were other players, summoned into the game with their own agendas. The realization hit him. The betrayal he suffered was likely the work of someone who considered Phantom their ultimate rival. Rising from a bath with a renewed sense of urgency, he quickly dried himself off. The boy knew that if he'd been targeted before, given his current ranking, he was an even bigger target now. Walking through the opulent palace halls, he reasoned that with the boundary collapsing between reality and the game, there was no safe place. Not in the game, nor in reality. The only path forward was simple. Become overwhelmingly powerful. Before the merge completed, he arrived at the throne room, where Isabella sat in regal command. She fixed him with a piercing gaze and asked if he was ready to fulfill his promise. Park responded with confident certainty, but before she could say more, he boldly stated his own terms. At first, the princess wondered what they were, and shockingly, Randolph demanded entry into the sanctuary. The request was audacious, almost insane given his current level, but he explained his reasoning. If the first main quest was survival, then the second quest was about obtaining a class. And he didn't want just any class. He aimed for the very top. So he told Isabella he knew the location of a star that could only be obtained there. It was then that a system notification appeared, and the boy smiled. He had to obtain a class, and the rewards varied depending on the rank of the class obtained. He had to obtain a class in the sanctuary, and the quest would end immediately upon obtaining it. As the scene shifted to cold, stone floors of the palace were littered with bodies. The guards who had stood in Isabella's way lay twisted and lifeless, their blood pooling beneath them. Isabella wiped her face clean, without the slightest hint of remorse. Behind her was Randolph, who watched in uneasy silence, shaken by how effortlessly she had slaughtered an entire squad. Knowing there was no ally more reliable than her, the scene shifts to a few hours earlier. We see Randolph revealing to Isabella that the crucial star was right there, and we discover that the boy stumbled upon the 4th star secret by chance while leveling up his previous character. He was likely the only player who knew its precise location. He told the girl that to lift the curse, with the blessing of the stars, he absolutely had to obtain it. But Isabella warned him the sanctuary wasn't a place just anyone could waltz into, and if anyone found out the lady had secretly brought someone inside, things would turn very bad. But Randolph quickly persuaded her by insisting there was no time, and she needed to think carefully. This was her last chance to escape the desert. Back in the present, we see that Park knew without his earlier persuasion, his own head might have been among the rest. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted when Isabella halted before a massive, ominous doorway. She announced this was their destination, as a staircase plunged into a suffocating darkness. Below, the ominous holy ground. A system warning then floated before Park, identifying the location as the hidden sanctuary of the desert, and Park clearly knew his level was nowhere near high enough to survive the poison within. The system informed him that the recommended level was level 8, and as the area overflowed with poison and demonic energy, entry was not advised for him. Yet, the purple miasma swirling around them didn't harm him at all, sliding off his body, as though repelled by an invisible barrier. His giant's demon resistance made him immune, and he quietly calculated his next move. A level 2 player should never set foot here, but with Isabella's overwhelming strength, clearing the exploration subquest would be simple. Even so, as his foot touched the first step, his expression hardened. He wasn't here for simple exploration. The main quest, hovering in front of him, demanded that he obtain a class. He knew the class's very tier hinged entirely on his actions within this sacred sanctuary. His ambitions stretched far beyond ordinary professions. He was chasing something truly rare, one of the legendary mysterious ones. Before he could descend further, Isabella peered down at the treacherous cliff. She just smirked, a smug thought crossing her mind. Even the star-bearer had taken the wrong path. But as she turned to casually walk away, the boy firmly grabbed her shoulders, demanding to know where she was headed. Isabella flashed a nervous smile, telling Randolph that the bridge ahead was a deadly trap, and powerful downward air currents were designed to sweep away anyone foolish enough to cross unknowingly. But before the lady could even finish her warning, Randolph playfully asked if she was scared of heights. This struck a raw nerve with the lady, as she nervously spun around and fiercely told the boy she knew nothing that could possibly be called fear in her dictionary. But the boy relentlessly called her out, teasing her about being timid and whatnot. But the lady insisted, telling the boy that the odds of the bridge being a trap were incredibly high, and conveniently, she'd suddenly gotten a terrible cramp in her leg, so she really should check for a safer route. But hearing that, Randolph promptly knelt and asked Isabella to get on his back. The girl was utterly flustered by this, that she gasped, asking if the boy had a death wish. But Randolph calmly countered, if Isabella didn't actually have a cramp, and with absolutely no time to waste, she would have to get on quickly, because the dead warriors would be reanimated in a few terrifying moments. And once the princess was suspected of not being in the castle, the queen's relentless pursuit team would surely arrive. Rather than wasting precious time, it was far better for the boy to carry her. Even as the lady's face flushed crimson, she knew, deep down, the boy was right, climbing onto Randolph's sturdy shoulders, while silently cursing her so-called cramped leg. But the boy told her to hold on tight, as both of them then began leaping around. Suddenly, the snake princess noticed Randolph was heading the wrong way, straight towards the empty void instead of the bridge. The girl instantly began screaming, bewildered by Randolph's bizarre actions. But ignoring all her frantic warnings, Randolph simply leaped into the air, activating his hidden mutant trait. This power allowed him to see all the secrets, invisible to the naked eye. And just like that, the void revealed a secret staircase, an invisible path previously hidden. As Isabella stood there in shock, Randolph calmly informed her this was the real path. She couldn't help but wonder why. A mere commoner knew of a path, even she was unaware of. And even here, in this sanctuary, overflowing with poison and demonic energy, Randolph wasn't even gasping for breath. She knew then that far too many strange things were happening to simply be chalked up to him being a star-bearer. But before the lady could ponder further, Randolph suddenly turned around and teased Isabella about her acrophobia. The princess was utterly shocked. Randolph was so relaxed in her presence. This wasn't just the confidence that comes from being strong. It was as if Randolph was welcoming an old friend he hadn't seen in years, unable to hold back any longer. She stared into his eyes and asked the question that had been haunting her Have we met before? Randolph ignored her at first, but then he decided to tell the princess. They had indeed met in the same place. However, even though he had seen her, the snake princess had never seen him. As they both reached the end of the stairs, a blinding light expanded around them, and when it finally faded, they found themselves lying on a serene, grassy hillside, far removed from the abyss below. Randolph explained they had passed through a domain barrier, a magical filter designed to hide the true sanctuary from anyone unworthy of reaching it. Petals drifted softly across the hillside. His expression sharpened, triggering game memories that warned him something would begin. At any moment, that instinct was confirmed when, deep within the rock face before them, a single, red eye snapped open and glowed with ancient, mechanical malice. From the shadows, massive stone shapes began to stir. One by one, their eyes ignited like burning coals. In the dark, a towering golem rose from the earth, its molten core throbbing in its chest. Like a miniature sun, Park assessed the creature, immediately recognizing the rune engraved on its chest as the mark of an upper-tier guardian, one strong enough to kill him instantly. Despite the danger, he turned to Isabella with a confident grin, teasing her about whether her supposed leg cramp had healed enough for a fight. Annoyed by all those stones, the snake princess told Randolph to just shut up and watch her get to work. Multiple rock golems started running towards the duo, getting ready to punch. Isabella first with all their might. But the lady was standing without any fear, and she was just smiling as she descended on the monster, like a flash of red lightning, striking every weak point on the golem's body with overwhelming speed and precision. The massive construct trembled mid-attack, its rocky frame fracturing under the impossibly fast assault. Park observed with a satisfied smile, amazed once again by the absurd efficiency of an assassin class, overwhelming a tank-type monster that should have required a full raid party. Even though Park had made the character himself, it was still absurd for him, because this was what a level 8 truly meant, and this was the sheer power it possessed. The golem collapsed into glowing shards before it could recover, unable to withstand the sheer difference in stats. As the dust settled, a blue system window appeared before Park, surprising him with a new option, the Golem Maker class. Park realized that because they were traveling together, Isabella's kill had been credited to him as well. Park considered this carefully. Summoner-type classes were rare, incredibly versatile, and obtaining one this early was something most players could only dream of. But he pressed the decline button without hesitation. He hadn't come this far for a mere high-tier prize. His target lay much, much higher. Before the window even faded, the ground trembled once more. Dark purple shadows seeped up from the earth like smoke, twisting and gathering into a vortex of ominous energy. Isabella felt the change immediately and spun around dagger raised, sensing a threat far beyond the previous guardians. The swirling energy condensed, forming a massive silhouette that dwarfed the earlier golems. A system message echoed through the sanctuary, announcing the awakening of the ancient king, the true master of the mountain, buried beneath the nameless star. Park lifted his gaze toward the ominous darkness above them, because this was the entity he had come for. A colossal serpentine head emerged from the shadows, its purple eyes burning with divine, otherworldly power. Park and Isabella stood side by side, tiny figures facing the majestic and terrifying form of the ancient king. Dramit, a final warning, flashed across Park's vision in blinding red, declaring that his level was catastrophically insufficient for a challenge meant for level 10, yet he stared straight ahead, unwavering. The crushing aura of the ancient king descended on Park, like a physical weight, forcing the air from his lungs and leaving him momentarily breathless. High above them, the colossal mountain guardian coiled through the sky, its body so immense that it eclipsed the sun, trying to keep himself composed. Park shot Isabella a shaky smile, but the lady wondered if he expected her to fight. Something of that scale alone. But the boy started, explaining that the Snake Princess shouldn't worry. Despite the Mountain Guardian's terrifying appearance, he was actually quite gentle, never attacking first. But before his words were even complete, the serpent lashed down with devastating force, shattering the earth, exposing the lie behind his casual tone. Isabella was flung across the ground, escaping only because her instincts carried her away from the destruction. At the last possible second, Park stood frozen amid the debris with an awkward grin, realizing too late that the guardian he remembered as almost gentle was anything but that. Isabella's glare burned with disbelief and fury, her expression torn between shocked outrage and murderous intent at the deception he'd fed her. He stared at the serpent in genuine confusion, wondering why the wise and cooperative guardian from his past runs had turned into a berserk monster, intent on crushing them both. But Isabella screamed, wondering if the snake had seemed friendly to Randolph. But then the ancient king's hiss reverberated through the sanctuary, as it demanded proof of their qualification. Through combat, Isabella shouted at him, demanding an explanation for why she was targeted, when she wasn't the one challenging the sanctuary. But the snake immediately told her she had defied his decree, and now she was denying her intent. Now Isabella finally realized what had happened, and the snake told her that if she couldn't prove herself, then she would never leave alive. Then came another catastrophic strike that forced her into a frantic dance between life and death. Every attack drove her closer to exhaustion. She screamed for instructions, while Park mentally scrambled to understand why the timeline had changed. Then the realization struck him like a lightning bolt. He remembered the deepest lore of Dramit, the enchanted beast that grew wise by consuming the spiritual energy of the star. In his previous life, he had cleared this sanctuary using Wilhelm, a character who had already reached level 10, and transcended the mortal limit by getting 5 stars. Dramit, recognizing Wilhelm's overwhelming power, guided him straight to the promised reward. The truth was both simple and cruel. Dramit only ever respected strength. Anyone weaker than him was nothing more than prey. Park bit his thumb, seething with frustration. At level 2, the Guardian clearly saw him as food. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Isabella was being tossed around like a mere rag doll. The serpent's overwhelming force sent her skidding violently across the dirt. The sanctuary's poison was finally taking its toll, tightening around her lungs and muscles alike, making every movement agonizingly slow. The lady continuously wondered if stepping into this place, especially after the Star Bearer's warning, was a grave mistake. Just as the final, lethal blow descended toward Isabella, a sharp, commanding voice cut across the battlefield, ordering the colossal beast to halt. To her complete disbelief, the enormous serpent actually froze. Mid-strike, its massive, ancient gaze turned toward Park, narrowing with deep suspicion. As the creature wondered why, he knew the serpent's true name. Park stepped forward with the practiced confidence of someone who knew exactly what to say, boldly claiming that the snake's true master, Wilhelm, the transcendent being Dramit, once served with absolute loyalty, had returned. The Guardian hesitated as it tried to reconcile the weak human standing before it with the legendary hero it remembered. The hesitation gave way to a deep, earth-shaking laughter that made the ground tremble. The beast mocked him, pointing out he was even weaker than the stone. Golem's outside, nowhere near the transcendence that defined Wilhelm. It remembered Wilhelm, all right, and it also knew the man had utterly failed. The Demon Realm expedition. His death was absolute. Infuriated by Park's supposed impersonation of its dead master, Dramit opened its massive jaw to devour him whole. But Park didn't budge an inch. He held his ground with an unnerving stillness. Instead of pleading, he uttered a single, powerful phrase, commanding the mighty serpent to honor the ancient contract they'd made. The jaws snapped shut just inches from his face. The sheer wind pressure blasted Randolph backward, but left him completely unharmed. Confusion replaced rage in Dramit's eyes as it recoiled. It furiously demanded to know how a mere stranger could speak of a pact that had never been revealed to anyone before. Park simply smirked, radiating confidence, anchored by his deep knowledge of the game's hidden lore. He then recited the precise terms of the secret contract. Whoever possessed the star would learn the Guardian's true name and become its master, bound by a deadly curse. Should they ever reveal this pact to an outsider? Inside, he exhaled a silent sigh of relief, thankful that the game's intricate lore and mechanics were functioning exactly as they had in Pangea, because he, though physically Park, carried the memories of the original player who made that contract. The curse itself created a loophole he could exploit. Dramit was deeply unsettled by this impossible contradiction and furiously demanded to know who exactly he truly was. Park didn't answer Dramit's demand for his identity directly. Instead, he commanded the serpent to take him to the star, claiming the truth would reveal itself there. Dramit issued a grim warning, stating that the star burned the unworthy to ash before they could even approach it. Park countered with a sharp, cutting taunt, questioning whether the Guardian was simply afraid that a new master might rise and claim its loyalty. The ancient beast scoffed at his brazen insult, seeing only a frail, insignificant boy who seemed like he'd crumble from a single bite. Yet curiosity and the binding force of the ancient contract left the Guardian with no other choice but to obey. It decided that letting the star incinerate the intruder would be a far more fitting punishment than killing him outright, and turned to lead the way forward. Isabella followed, utterly stunned, unable to comprehend how he had subdued a god-tier monster. With sheer knowledge and unwavering confidence, their path led them deep into the heart of the sanctuary, where an enormous, ancient, stone altar rose like a monolith beneath the dark, purple sky. Park informed her that this altar housed the very source of all the sanctuary's power. At its summit lay a pristine white skull, resting upon a magical seal, radiating a dense, ancient energy. He clarified that this was no ordinary relic, but the star itself, the preserved face of the fallen goddess Li. Legends claim that when the twin goddess died, her divinity shattered into 32 fragments across the continent. These fragments, known to the people of the world as stars, were capable of granting transcendence to those strong enough to claim them. Without hesitation, Park climbed the altar and lifted the skull into his hands. Intense heat pulsed from the artifact, instantly bathing his face in a blinding crimson glow. Isabella screamed as a blast of magical fire erupted from the skull, engulfing him entirely. Dramit watched with sadistic amusement, convinced the foolish human had attempted to seize divine power beyond his limits. Within the inferno, Park was silently cursing the Guardian's arrogance, but utterly refusing to let go. He knew the truth behind the mechanism. The star only killed those who tried to bypass the Guardian, to steal it. Because he had passed Dramit's test, he was guaranteed survival. The only uncertainty was whether he would obtain the class he sought. Because if someone acquired a star without an existing class, then the star bestows a class upon the individual automatically. And even though Randolph had never tried it himself, he had only learned about it by accident. As he tightened his grip, cracks began to spiderweb across the skull's surface. The bone fractured, erupting into a blinding, pure light. This revealed the true essence hidden deep within. It was the attribute of void itself. His hidden traits surged around him like a chaotic, wild storm, merging flawlessly with this powerful new energy. What a brilliant spectacle of vibrant, shifting colors. A cosmic voice then echoed through his mind, acknowledging him, yes, him, as the one who now stood before destruction itself. When the scorching flames finally died down, he remained completely unharmed, surrounded by a majestic, multicolored aura of his newly awakened power. System messages instantly poured forth, confirming that his very mana had completely transformed into star energy, and that he had officially obtained the star successor class. Isabella's eyes trembled uncontrollably as she witnessed the truly impossible unfold. A mere human absorbing a star's divinity and surviving, bathed in that same divine light. Park turned toward her, asking what her heart truly desired. Still dazed, she answered him with raw honesty. She wanted to escape the desert and uncover the truth of her lost bloodline. He offered to grant her profound wish and promised to bless her freedom, but only under one crucial condition. She would serve him absolutely for 1 full year, after which he would then help her reclaim her lineage. Extending his hand, Randolph assured her that unlike the deceiving queen, he did not lie. Overwhelmed by the thrilling promise of freedom and the immense power radiating from him, the proud snake princess knelt before him in total submission. Park looked down with a satisfied smirk, commending her for making the truly wise choice. His attention then shifted to the massive, coiled serpent lurking in the shadows. Addressing it by name, he watched as the once regal, ancient king recoiled and stammered, utterly fearful of the aura surrounding the newly ascended star successor. A system window then appeared before Park, tallying a staggering 230 points, confirming his absolute dominance in the Hall of Fame. The feat was so extraordinary, so unprecedented, that even distant, combat-oriented constellations began to watch his journey with intense, newfound interest. Far away, within the Desert Queen's opulent palace, the queen was utterly stunned to learn that Isabella had brazenly entered the sanctuary with the very slave she'd captured. She immediately commanded her squad to seize them both, without a moment's hesitation or delay. As the scene abruptly shifts to reality, we find the morning sun casting a blinding glare across the city streets. Inside a bustling cafe, a clandestine group of top-tier players had gathered. Their voices were hushed, but their excitement was palpable as they discussed the anomaly known as Randolph. They knew that even if they completely ignored main Quest 1, getting a higher score than Grazia would be impossible unless someone knew the game inside and out. Only the 5-year veteran Ghost player, Phantom, could finally appear to make it happen. And this news was about to cause an absolute ruckus. The men wondered aloud if they could possibly contact him before anyone else. But a lone female player listened with utter disinterest, casually sipping her drink. She clearly doubted their chances of tracking down someone so utterly elusive whom they hadn't found in 5 years. One of the men countered, explaining that until now, Phantom wasn't an actual player. He simply wasn't that strong. But now that he's a real player inside the game, there had to be a way. Another player then proposed a familiar tactic. Since Phantom was now physically present in the real world, he could be baited, using the recently reopened secret auction hall. She paused, slowly considering the idea. She acknowledged that Randolph would certainly need high-level equipment to maintain his ranking in the upcoming main quest. The strategy was simple, yet utterly predatory. List a valuable item at an absurdly low price, specifically to lure in a desperate buyer. Attach a tracking talisman to the item, then follow it to the target's location to rob or even kill them. Another man hesitated, wondering if a seasoned veteran like Phantom would truly fall for such a transparent, beginner-level trap. But his companion insisted that even experts had needs, and anyone striving for power could be blinded by a tempting opportunity. The girl's expression finally shifted from boredom to manic. She was thrilled to think someone so decisive was ready to launch a grand Demon Realm expedition, despite past failures. She kept blathering on about how, when Phantom saw a cheap, juicy item in the auction hall, he might just snap it up. He'd think he was so powerful that if he came back, all his pursuers would be dead. Both boys were so utterly shocked that they even tried calling 911, attempting to report the stalking the girl was trying to do. As they mused, they speculated about Randolph's real-world identity, imagining he must be a CEO or wealthy heir, if his in-game prowess was anything to go by. Elsewhere, a holographic interface flashed a brutal update. The player known as Massacre had been stripped of his rights and banned from the auction. A hand clenched around the device in fury, unable to accept that another player had accumulated enough points to outrank him. Sitting alone in his dim apartment, Massacre dismissed the setback with chilling calm. His confidence stemmed from a history of violence. His rise through the rankings had never relied on skill, but on murdering anyone who stood in his way. To him, this setback was temporary. He vowed to reclaim his position by simply killing whoever had dared to get ahead. Back in the game world, a cheerful notification announced the completion of the Sanctuary exploration subquest. Park was reading about the rewards for a perfect clear. The exploration rate was a perfect 100%, and they acquired the achievement Conqueror of a Sanctuary. Among the rewards was an epic-grade teleport book, Moments Latte. They were comfortably riding atop the massive serpent, Dramit, with the serpent giving directions like a living GPS. As they traveled, a warm light from the system enveloped him, signaling another level up from the earlier battles. Reaching level 3 truly pleased him. He did notice his progression had slowed, though, but the boy knew the exact reason. It was his possession of so many high-tier talents, which drastically increased his required experience by nearly tenfold. Even so, he readily accepted the trade-off. The superior stat. Growth was worth every single moment of grinding. Sitting cross-legged on Dromidas' head, he couldn't help but grin. As he reviewed the items he'd gained from the quest, Isabella watched him curiously, unsure why he was suddenly so cheerful, or what strange artifacts he was examining. His attention centered on the Shadow Cloak, a reward that granted true invisibility, a useful free stealth skill for future encounters. Suddenly, the serpent's massive pupil contracted, as it sensed a disturbance in the magical barrier surrounding their sanctuary. An invisible soldier glided through the passage, clearly signaling that the sanctuary's isolation had been breached. Dromidas' deep voice resonated through the air as he warned his master of intruders entering their grounds. Park and Isabella reacted instantly. The peaceful atmosphere shattered. Isabella immediately understood who they were. The Queen's pursuit squad had finally caught up. Her expression darkened as she evaluated the threat. Even without the Queen herself, the squad possessed more than enough power to crush them. Park, however, remained composed. Riding the sanctuary's guardian gave them an advantage no enemy could match. With a firm command, he ordered Dromidas to intercept the incoming squad. To buy them time, the guardian hissed in acknowledgement before turning its massive body toward the intruders, its eyes glowing with lethal intent. Park and Isabella leapt from its back, landing on the stone bridge. As Dromidas prepared for the impending clash, they sprinted across the sanctuary, Isabella racing ahead, while trusting Park's assurance that the Queen herself wasn't among the attackers. Park calculated their odds quickly. If they got delayed here, the main force would box them in, cutting off every single escape route. They had no other choice but to rely on pure speed and cunning. Isabella glanced back while they ran, feeling a wave of relief when she realized Park wasn't abandoning Dramit out of cruelty, but out of pure tactical necessity. He quickly laid out the plan. They needed to reach the warp gate at the very edge of the desert. It was now accessible thanks to her lifted curse. But as the massive stone archway came into view, he stopped dead in his tracks, boots scraping the ground, as the critical flaw in their plan struck him. The gate was dormant and required a long charging period before it could activate. When Isabella asked how long, he answered grimly that they'd need to hold the area for half a day, with almost no cover around them. He could only hope Dramit would delay the Queen's forces for long enough. He told Isabella he needed to use this time to communicate with the star, a convenient excuse. Masking his real need to log out. Isabella accepted the explanation without hesitation, stepping forward with fierce loyalty as she drew her weapon and vowed to protect him at all costs. Trusting her, he initiated the logout sequence, and his consciousness faded from the digital world. Park awoke in his bed, with the morning light seeping through the window. His mind felt disoriented, shifting between realities. Sitting up slowly, He checked his phone to confirm the time and assess how much of the real world still remained untouched. For now, the monster invasion had not yet begun, giving him a brief but precious moment of calm. Still, the dimensional collapse was accelerating, and he needed to divide his time between leveling up in the game and gathering real-world intelligence. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden chime from his phone when he glanced at the caller ID. His expression soured. It was Kim, his ex, the very woman who belittled him, used him for his money, then abandoned him for a wealthier man. Her call triggered memories of their toxic relationship, flashing through his mind, ending with the cold dismissal that left him utterly humiliated. The scene shifted to a cafe where Kim sat, tapping her foot impatiently, annoyed that he hadn't arrived yet. But she was actually on a call with someone who sounded furious, telling her not to push it any further. The man was consistently buying her food and clothes, but Kim brazenly justified her actions, telling him not to act cheap. She claimed it was his responsibility to spend money on his girlfriend. Even when the man wanted to meet up, she denied him, declaring she had nothing to say, explaining she had a meeting with a friend today, so he shouldn't contact her. The guy wanted to know who she was meeting, but before he could press further, Kim got the call and was annoyed with her boyfriend. She was thinking that even though Park was pathetic, at least he listened to her, and she mused that she should have drained him even further. While she had the chance, when Park finally arrived, she instantly plastered on a sugary smile, as if their toxic past never existed. Still wearing his tracksuit, he stood completely unimpressed and demanded to know why she called. She attempted to charm him, leaning forward seductively, pretending she missed the very qualities she once mocked. She gazed up with practiced innocence, asking if he had missed her. Park didn't even bother addressing her transparently fake sentiment. Instead, his mind wandered to whether he should even order a drink. He noticed the cafe's one drink per person sign and realized she hadn't even bothered to buy him a coffee, despite dragging him all the way here. Disgusted by her blatant cheapness, he simply turned around and began walking away. And panicking, Kim desperately tried to salvage the disastrous situation, asking if he was still angry about their breakup. He paused just long enough to ask if her current boyfriend knew. She was secretly meeting her ex behind his back. The color drained from her face at his cutting words. She scrambled after him as he coolly walked out, her voice escalating into hysterical pleas. But Park didn't spare her a single glance. In the past, he would have crumbled under her manipulation. Now, strengthened by Randolph's newfound resolve, he felt nothing but a cold detachment. As he walked away from the cafe, a violent crash suddenly sounded behind him, turning toward the crowded street. He saw a frenzied man waving a terrifying box cutter, screaming at terrified onlookers. The attacker then lunged at a young girl with chilling, murderous intent. The blade flashed downward in a deadly blur, but before it could even touch her, Park decisively stepped in, grabbing the attacker's wrist with a force that seemed to echo through the entire street. The girl looked up at him in stunned disbelief, while the man screamed, completely unable to break free from Park's iron grip.